Hi, this is Steve Palladino at Palladino Power Project, and I'm bringing you this video about the Super Power Calculator functions um, with the purpose of helping you determine uh, how to adjust training targets based on heat, humidity, altitude. And there's a couple ways of doing it. Let me start by showing you this function here. So all various functions in the SuperPower calculator are listed here. And we're looking for ones that's going to help us with looking up our zones and so forth. So we want to pick this calculate zones from FTP, look up specific percentages, and also we can do environmental adjustments on this. So let's select that. And with a SuperPower calculator, the yellow entry fields are mandatory or required, and then the results are in green. So in this case, I'm just going to use a hypothetical example of a 300 a runner with a 300 watt FTP or CP. And I put in 70 kilograms. That's not even required. That's not even an issue here. If you want to put in watts per kilogram, you could enter that right here by toggling the units here. But we're going to use 300 watts for this particular example as the FTP or CP. And then I'm going to put in some condition to change the conditions. So let's say that usually this athlete runs at an elevation of about 75 meters. We're not going to change that, so we're going to also put that as the target as well. So they're just staying at their usual home base. But they usually train at 18 degrees. You can change the units to Fahrenheit if you like. 18 degrees, 75%. So this is the usual training environment that the runner has. But let's say they go into a heat wave or some bad conditions, and they're still at the same home base, 75 meters of altitude, but now it's set 27 degrees and 80% humidity. So when I enter all of those values in, it gives you an environmental adjustment that you can see right here. All right, so let's go see how that impacts our training zones. Now, notice I came down here and I clicked on the zones tab, or was on the main tab. So click over to the zones tab, and first of all, you can select which zone system. There's several of them, or a number of them, built into the system. So if you use stride zones, there you go. It changes the zones. And the zones are also color coded, so that we'll refer back to that when we get into this adjustment example. So select your zones, and that will allow you to see your zones. Now, in this case, it draws in information from that main page: 70 kilograms, 300 watts FTP, CP, that environmental adjustment based on those conditions that we entered, and then it produces this adjusted FTP, which is just the environmentally or condition dependent FTP. So what that then does is allow you to come over here and see the effect on your zones if you happen to train in zones. So let me just fix this over here really quick. So you can actually see the zones here, the adjusted zones based on a 288 watt adjusted FTP based on those conditions we entered. And so here are the new zones. These were the zones under the usual set of circumstances. These are the zones now based on the adjustment. Now, I don't really prescribe by zones, but you may be following a plan by zones, and this will help in that regard. I use percentages, so I usually will say 6 times 5 minutes at 100 to 102%. So 100% is 300 watts here, and 289 watts in the higher temperature and higher humidity conditions that we entered. And if I wanted to put in 102%, so we can see that the range went from 288 to 294 as the new target range for that set of intervals, based on the percentages. So there's a few ways. This is another feature that doesn't apply to this example, but let's say we wanted to find out what 280 watts was. 280 watts is 93.3% using the normal conditions, but it's 97.2% using the adjusted FTP. So running to the same power at this across these different conditions, you can see it's a much higher relative intensity in these conditions. Notice that these have zone labels, so this will tell you that 294 is in zone 4, and 97% here is in zone 3. It just coordinates that for you. So one last way of doing adjustments, if you don't want to use that particular function, you could come to this very basic adjust power or FTP based on altitude, temperature, humidity. So in here, let's say we wanted to run 275 watts. That was what the original prescription was for, and that was the target power. We enter it here what the target power is, and we adjust it. Again, these are the same set of circumstances, and this will tell you that 274 or 275 watts under these conditions here is equivalent to about 264 based on these conditions. So there's a couple of ways of adjusting your targets or zones based on what the conditions are, if they're dramatically different than what your usual conditions are. Keep in mind that your FTP, CP is somewhat limited in terms of the conditions. In other words, your 300 watt FTP at sea level is not going to be the same at say 2,000 meters. So you need to adjust, and you do it this way. Now, after that's said and done, realize that these adjustments, these percentages, that's based on population data. Your specific adjustment may vary a bit, but this at least gives you a starting point, and you can adjust by your perceived exertion. You could also adjust by your own history, what you know is your percentage of increase or decrease under certain conditions. So there you have it. Hopefully that's helpful. Play around, go through some imaginary or hypothetical scenarios, and this will allow you to adjust your training targets based on conditions. Thank you for watching. See you next time.